target's on his back, he's Hello, everybody, and welcome to Optional Rule. My name is Scott. This is my weekly live stream to discuss all things related to D&D and design my game for the upcoming campaign that I have coming. I'm currently running Rime of the Frostmaiden. It is early November 2020 if you're seeing this later. So I use this time to help prepare my game, and I love this live stream because I get to talk about critical elements around GMing and game design that I use successfully over 40 years of running games. And I hope some of it will be useful to you as well. And I just like to talk about D&D. So welcome to this stream, especially if you're a new viewer. Welcome, it's great to have you here. I try to make this a conversational style. So I would love to, got to turn my desktop audio off, sorry. I try to make this a conversational style. So if you're here in the live stream, I would love to talk about anything related to D&D. So go ahead and put your comments down in the chat, in the live chat, whether you're viewing on YouTube or Twitch. I'd love to engage with you. There's a little bit of a lag, so understand that that comes to me a little bit later. But any questions you might have, go ahead and leave them in the chat here. You can also post to me on Twitch. I'm Optional Rule over on Twitch. I'm really Optional Rule everywhere. Sorry, I mean Twitter. I'm Optional Rule on Twitter. I'm Optional Rule obviously here on Twitch and also over on YouTube. So please go ahead and give me a follow, give me a like. This is the new channel. I've only been doing it for a few weeks now. So like, subscribe, follow, rain dance, anything that you think would be useful. Please go ahead and show your support. And I would love to engage with you on topics related to tabletop gaming and D&D of any kind. I don't just do D&D, although I'm doing D&D right now and have been for some time. Primarily, I'm doing D&D, but I've played all kinds of system, everything from Burning Wheel on up. Now, this stream today is going to be a little different than previous streams. What I typically do on the weekend is I write my preparation for my D&D Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign, but we were off last week because of the election. If you're watching this later, this is election week in the US, and that carries with it all the interesting things that you might have read in the news. However, we did not have our session because it's Tuesday night, which is election day, and most of the players just felt like for whatever reason that wasn't the night that they could focus on the game. So we chose not to have it. So my session prep from last live stream, which you can go back and watch, that's all valid and ready to go for next session. I don't have more prep to do right now. So what I thought I would do is I'd talk about random encounters and sort of my system for developing random encounters, how to make them better than you typically get in the book. And that's just a matter of tailoring. There's no deficiency in sort of standard module design when it comes to random encounters. Usually it's just more a matter of how tailored is it to your running style, how tailored is it to the story that you're telling. So that's what I was going to do today. This might be a shorter live stream depending on how many questions we get and how much I'm going to accomplish here today. Oh, I've got my Google Drive up and I didn't really need to do that. Okay, so I am going to I'm using, first of all, Notion SO for my all my note keeping and my DMing and all that kind of stuff here in my campaign. I have quite a bit in Notion SO. I like it. It's a pretty good program. I no support here, by the way. There's no support at all in this channel, and I don't generally monetize it. So this is just a discussion of D&D, and I hope it's good. So I don't plan on throwing a Patreon at people or monetizing the stream or doing anything like that I don't need to do. If I start to offer services, I've had a question about that. Do I intend to monetize it at a later date? If I offer something I think is worthwhile, I'm likely to do that. I do anticipate making an announcement in the next week or so. It might be that I sell things, whether that's independently through the OGL or on the DMs Guild that I'm creating. I do intend to do that, and I'll announce things like that as they come out and become available. But I don't want to generally run a meter on community building. I'd rather just have a discussion. I have a job, so I enjoy D&D, and I hope you do too. And I would love to engage you in conversation around what is fun about D&D and different methods we can use to make our games better and all those sorts of things. And then specifically why it's worth a discussion and why my time to do this. I think I have some insight and I have some points of view that I think are worthwhile to consider. I've said this on pretty much every live stream, but one of the things I want to foster here is a discussion about the actual process of running games, which is a very messy process because real games, whether they be online or whether they be in person, sit at this junction of social interactions and systematic rules and event hosting and narrative development and improvisation and collaborative storytelling. It's at this intersection of a number of things. And I tweeted a little earlier today, in fact, one of the key things that really sets tabletop gaming apart from all of these is it's active media. So you're not sitting there consuming something like you are here on Twitch, and I hope you're engaged in discussion to make it more than just a passive consuming. But the other bit is that it's one of the few mediums where we talk about the heroic arc, where the players are the proactive members of a story, that's something that I actually think often fails in running games, that people for some reason think of games as a book or a novel or a play or a movie or whatever, but those are passive mediums. And in almost all cases, the protagonist in that is actually passive, not proactive. It's the villain in these things that are proactive. They have plans, they're entrepreneurial, they go out and they're trying to make something happen in their world, whether that be evil or not. And the main character of these stories is generally reacting to what the villain is doing or reacting to the situation. Now that happens in D&D, and that's a valid way to tell a story. But but players really just make up their own mind about how proactive versus reactive they are. Often, what's called power gaming or what's called something else is just a player being more entrepreneurial in their pursuit of running their character. They want to make decisions proactively ahead of time. They want to mitigate for possible future circumstances rather than waiting for them to happen. They want to do all of that. And that's something that sets tabletop gaming apart from almost all other medium that you might get, even apart from computer games. Computer games are, at the end of the day, no matter how much the algorithm gives you the illusion of independence, it's all a railroad. It's all a canned experience. It's all just a way to get you to click a mouse a certain number of times or hit a button or whatever and move forward. Games have a dependency of input from everybody at the table, the DM just being one of them, the players being a major part of the other parts of that, requires a derivative work on the part of every member at the table to bring that game of life to life and move it forward. So, random encounters. And where do random encounters fit in the midst of all this? So I think there's a couple of misconceptions in my mind about random encounters that have sort of normalized in the community of tabletop RPGs. The first one is that random encounters are just something random. They're just, who knows what happens. It's something that magically falls out of the sky, and it really has no necessary link to the rest of the world. You run across a monster in a field, or just a band of orcs eating a cake, or whatever. Just something random happens. Now, why I think that's a myth is that it doesn't serve the game itself. The game should be a progressive narrative. Well, I think the game should be a progressive narrative that ties to all other elements of the game. There are elements of narratives that still do hold true in tabletop games, even if tabletop games are somewhat different. And one of those is the economy of narrative. That I think it was Chekhov who said that if you see a gun in Act 2, it should be used in Act 3. That everything brought to the table should have some connection to the rest of the plot as a whole and to moving things forward. Now, there's with all things in gaming, you have to walk a line. You can't just make it only about the narrative. Which brings us to the other myth that random encounters are simply encounters. They're a combat encounter, and I don't see random encounters that way. Random encounters, in my opinion, work best as opportunities for the GM to tell other stories about the world, to tell smaller stories about the world, but something still connected to the setting itself. One of the things we can sometimes do that's not the best form in gaming as a GM, especially, is having sort of this block of text or this large narrative for players to consume about the world or the setting or the political situation or something like that, that we push at them sort of a documentary style. This is what's happening, a sort of a background of the world, and it's very dry, and it's not really relevant often to their characters. And I think random encounters, and I'm using that term ironically, actually, because it's not random. Random encounters are the best way to tell the story of your setting that is not used by most GMs. So, what I mean by that, if you're in a setting where there's a hot political situation or a war or something like that, you're wasting narrative time by having players run across 5 random orcs not connected to anything in a random, or an owlbear randomly, or a wolf, or just something, anything that's just a combat encounter, rolling initiative and running through combat without a background or a context. That's a huge missed opportunity to tell the players something meaningful about the world that they could be absorbing instead of reading a boring set of text. So if the players are looking at a political situation in the world where you want to express the difficulties of how both sides are sort of at fault, a random encounter where they run across a battle in process, that they can watch the unfolding of this war or this political situation and be a neutral third party that makes a decision about what they see on, do they want to engage? If they choose to engage, how do they want to engage? Or they can choose to avoid it altogether. That tells them more about the political situations and the stakes of the world than a paragraph of text or some blog post to read later or some background material. So designing encounters that really drive home the narrative points about the setting or the main points about the plot line are really valuable tools for moving a group forward. So I think that's, if you spend a little time thinking about this as the DM, you can have some random encounters prepared. Now, what do you have to prepare? That's another myth that helps us do this preparation a little bit more effectively. There's this myth with random encounters that you need 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever number of encounters ready to go to randomly happen to players within the course of a campaign. And in my experience, that's simply not true. Really, if you think about it, how many random encounters are you going to get to in the course of an entire campaign, not just a session? I don't know about your sessions, and my sessions are run about 3 hours. That's about my max. I could do 4 if it's a really engaging party, but 3 to 4 hours really is about my max. I don't have the endurance to go 6 hours and something like that. So in a 3-hour game, the number of encounters, period, random or not, that I'm going to get to in a particular session is small. I might get to maybe 2 role-playing encounters and maybe 2 combat encounters, maybe. So that, given that economy per session, how much I want to accomplish, how much space do I even have for random encounters? If I had a random encounter every session, it would almost double the length of my campaign. And that's fluff and padding. If you've ever watched a TV series, if you've ever watched a movie that you thought, geez, they could cut that whole middle part out, that's a poorly crafted random encounter. All right. So I want to take this and make sure that it never feels like that every encounter, random or otherwise, feels like it's part of a living, breathing world that moves the players forward. So we get to the question of how do you do that? And herein lies the difficulty. Well, it's less difficult than I think. Actually, I'm creating my own myth right in the midst of my stream. It's not that hard. If you look at it, that you need a handful of encounters. Let's say 10. Let's say 10 maximum. You'll get to random encounters in an entire campaign. That's actually a pretty good number. Let's say you play for 20 weeks or 20 sessions or 25 sessions. That's 6 months, right? If you played every week without fail, of just about 6 months. That's a pretty good clip, actually. And you could probably stretch 10 good random encounters out over the course of a year. So pre-prepared, maybe you need to prepare 10 random encounters. That's it. Maybe a little bit more if you had a year-long campaign, maybe a little bit more than that. But these are small beats that should provide small distractions. Actually, let me break that out in a second. So anyway, that's the amount that you have to prepare. So in terms of DMing, the first thing you can do to demystify or reduce this air of complexity that you might be facing, or that might give you paralysis as a DM to progressing to writing things, is realizing you don't have to do that much. You don't even have to do a random encounter table that includes everything that could happen. You could do 5 good random encounters at a time, move on the next week or 2 weeks later and add 2 or 3 more, and just build that rolling list over time. The downside of that method for DMs is, and even for what I'm doing here, I think I'm 6 sessions in. I'm about to do my 7th session, and now I'm just getting to the random encounter table. Now, that hasn't been a huge deal because in the campaign I'm running, the way that the module itself is designed, although I've modified the module quite a bit, the way the module is designed is there's this core set of towns called the 10 towns right in the center of this area called Icewind Dale. The players are mostly ping-ponging back and forth between those 10 towns for this period of levels 1 to 4. After that, they get into the wider regional area, and that's where random encounters can kind of become more relevant and more prescient. I didn't feel like I needed them in the 10 town setting, and in urban settings, often you don't need them as a DM because, one, they can be distracting, but two, in a city, in a civilization, players often have these people that they want to go talk to. The random encounter generator for an urban environment is usually the player. They're usually coming up with things that they want to go do, whether that's buy magic items or whether they go investigate a plot thread or talk to an NPC or develop a new spell or scroll or whatever. They will feed you. They are your random encounter generators. You just need to think of some flourishes around it. Like, okay, if they go to the shop owner and you want to make it something, have some difficulty with the shop owner's family or them being pressed down by the mob locally, if that's a local thread, or they can't sell in the next town over, if that's part of your thread. But just give some flourishes, look at your list of plot threads that are happening, and tie something happening to that, into that for these urban encounters. Now, in doing that, I've got here, these are my main encounters, my main plot threads here in my version of Rime of the Frostmaiden. And if you read this module, the first thing you'll notice is that that's not the actual encounters, that's not the actual main plot threads of the module. I've significantly changed it. I've thrown out this whole Chartle and Dragon thing. Instead, my main 3 plot threads are Oriel, the goddess's reign of terror in locking Icewind Dale into an endless winter. Second plot is the Reghead nomads in the area. There's 4 different themed tribes. One tribe called the Tiger Tribe has a new queen who wishes her people to become the chosen of Oriel. So she's in this purge of the Tiger Tribe and then war on other members of the Reghead nomads and Greater Icewind Dale in general. And then the third plot, I should have said this before, if you're a player of mine, go away. You can actually probably watch my first 3 streams by now. I think everything that's come out of that is happened in game, so you can probably go back and watch those. But this stream is not for you if you're watching it anytime around the early November period. So anyway, the other plot line I have is that I've thrown out this Chartle and Dragon plot line that they had because it didn't make sense, and instead I've got this political plot line where there's a faction within the 10 towns called the Chartland Syndicate, which is actually a Zentarum faction, but the Zentarum show up everywhere because of Adventures League, and it seems like a tired trope to me. So instead, there's this Chartland Syndicate with loose ties to the Zentarum. They have an alliance with the Duergar, who have a war going with the Mithril Hall, a dwarven kingdom to the south. And what the Duergar want out of this is they want Icewind Dale to be a supply line for them for their war for Chartland and other items in their war against Mithril Hall. And what the Chartland Syndicate wants out of that is profit. They want control of the 10 towns, and they want a ready-made 10 partner because they burned their bridges with all other parts of Icewind Dale and the Sword Coast. So pretty basic. It's not that hard to figure out. So So back to how do you create these flourishes, and how do you have to think a little bit on your feet, but every time a player says, I want to go see a shopkeep, I want to go find spells and see if I can try to find somebody to trade spells with, or I want to find out more about this information. Think to yourself, can I tie any of this back to any of these plots? So the player that goes and decides that they want to scribe extra spell, find another mage they can scribe spells off of. Maybe they attempt to recruit the player to the Charterland Syndicate and saying there's new rising power in town. They've been guaranteed that mages will have a special place here. Corrupt the players, give them something to test their ethical standings with and see what their points of view are. Maybe maybe the players go along with it. Maybe the players don't. Maybe they use that to take that person down or find out more information about the Charterland. All that is game. Same thing with Oriel's. I'll take the same scenario. Let's decide you want to do something with Oriel's Reign of Terror. This mage comes in and he finds out that there's some special power source. If you go ahead and you actually cater to Oriel's will and you do something like foster an additional human sacrifice every new moon or something like that. Maybe they gain a extra spell slot that they can use if they do something like tempt the player with some power or something in. Now, you have to decide what morality you want in your game. Maybe that's a bad decision. Maybe that's a good decision. And that's all your point of view as a game master. I wouldn't really do that. I would put that out there as a way to corrupt the player, but not expecting them to take it and expecting them to take that mage down. Or stop them from their next murder or something like that. Or let's take the third example: Tiger Tribe becoming the chosen people of Oriel. Maybe they go to find this wizard and they find out they've been kidnapped, and they've been kidnapped by Tiger Tribe members who are forcing this person to come train members of that tribe to be wizards or in magic or undo something or something like that. And it could be any one of these flourishes, but tying it back to your central plots become a core way for the players themselves to become adventure generators, to become plot generators or random encounter generators. So that's really what I think should happen, or at least a tool that you should consider using. That's what I do in my game. Now, this just puts a lot on game masters, and let me get to the next myth of random encounters, that some encounter has to happen every time you do something, especially in a setting. Sometimes as the players want to go buy something and you just got nothing as a game master and you're not feeling it, it's perfectly fine to say, I got nothing. Or just say, okay, well, you buy things, give me your list, and we'll check off gold pieces, and we move on to the next plot element. It's perfectly fine. Go with it when an idea occurs to you. Don't make it forced. Don't prematurely inject plots that you're not ready for. Don't do the J.J. Abrams thing where you're trying to tease something that looks interesting and you'll figure it out later. And now I say that mindful of the fact that I do that all the time. I tease things. I usually can make it good and tie it in later, but that's a dangerous territory to get, because unfulfilled plot lines just seem like wasted effort on the part of the party, and it dilutes plot lines that you may want to focus on later. So when you create this sense of confusion or uncertainty on whether something matters or not, it's hard for players to invest their emotional energy into a plot line or a thread if they're not sure if it's going someplace. And the counter argument to that is not everything goes someplace. And while that's true, and if that's your game mastering style and it works for you, well, God bless you, that's great. It doesn't generally work for me. And I will say, my counter to that is the real life is full of things that don't go places that we don't include in games. You don't play out every meal. You don't play out every bowel movement. You don't play out every sleeping 8 hours of sleep. You don't play a lot of things out. There's no reason that you have to have perfectly random encounters either that don't mean anything. So yeah, I would differ with George R. R. Martin in that way. All right, so you have these. So what do I recommend as a style to work these plots effectively for you? And I just said you want to sort of ad hoc go with something that you've thought of, but you're not victim to just inventing everything on the spot. So you can do some preparation as a GM to get yourself to the point where you have a lot of material to go with. So the first thing I do, I like to take the encounters that are already within a module, and then you should be seeing that here in my page. And if we go over to Icewind Dale in D&D Beyond, well, I'll get to the frequency of encounters in a second, but they provide you with this big old table of 20 possible random encounters that can happen. I recommend copying that table in and then just cutting that table down to the ones that you find interesting. Again, if you had 10, you would be totally fine for almost an entire campaign. What I've done is I copied this table into this document and I've cut it down to the ones that I thought had potential to be interesting, tied back to some plot somewhere that I want to tell, or an encounter I want to tell, or I just thought was just particularly interesting. So this is down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 or so out of the 20 that I was provided. And I cut out a lot of random things like Icewind Kobolds that I just thought wasn't interesting. Yeti, which are great. Yetis are great monsters, but what do I care? Why would I have a random encounter with this? I just cut it down to and then I put a little note in here of what story do I want to tell when I get to it. And this is something that Icewind Dale is actually a very good design module about. If you get down into these random encounters, they're not just a beast standing in the field. They give you these descriptions of how to run the encounter, what's tied back to the rest of the world. And actually, I think a lot of these are really good. And in this module in particular, you're probably going to find yourself thinking, oh, I can keep a lot of these. And that's true. But I would even then, I would recommend cutting them down. Remember, economy. Cutting these down to the ones that you think have specific utility for you at this point in the campaign with the next 4 or 5 sessions. If you go ahead and you can change it later, you can take stuff out, add stuff back in. There's no reason why you can't change your random encounters. But I would recommend doing that. The other is a sort of foreshadowing events. I put the plots in here and then I write out potential encounters. Encounters that help tell a story of that plot. And I may not get to it in this feed. We're already 20 or almost 30 minutes in. But what I normally list is just I write, it's like adventure seeds. It's like teeny tiny little, it's an encounter seed, not an adventure seed. So what stories do I want to tell? So I might list as bullets under here, like in Oriel's Reign of Terror, I might write a story about people taking advantage of the situation to gain personal power. So that could bleed over into the Tiger tribe. It can go into the Wolf tribe. It can do that example of the wizard I just told you, who's finding some ritual to work with Oriel. What are the other things? There's people taking advantage of each other rather than pulling together. So give me an example. I'll give you an example of that, and I'll even write it here, like a caravan, where the caravan, well, the teamsters, that's the people who run the caravan, have killed the travelers and taken all their stuff. Players run across them after the fact. Caravanners may not want witnesses, etc. So that's and I'll do this 4 or 5 times. And I just said you only need to come up with 10. This process is going to get you 20, 30. It's going to get you a lot. You can reuse these later, but it's a great exercise. If you take an hour as a DM to sit through these and just write these plot lines out, you end up with an amazing sort of resource that you can just draw back on. So, so imagine you're the players, you're coming across, you see a caravan that's sort of that's stopped for some reason, and they've got the pack animals sort of in a huddle, and you get close to it, and you find a bunch of caravanners burying bodies, and these look like civilians, and they've got a pile of their stuff to the side, and they tell you, piss off, you don't need to be around here, don't ask questions, and they say hold up, and then they start to argue about, well, we can't let witnesses get away. What do the players do in the midst of all that? That's a way more interesting encounter than orcs in a field. And orcs in a field, I'm not picking on orcs. Actually, I have an example of orcs here in this random encounter list. But that's that. So when you write out these plots, start writing out bullet points of what's interesting about it and what story do you want to tell, and go back to the core themes. I have themes here as well. Core themes of the module to do that. I'll get to theme-based encounters in a second. Theme-based encounters are a blend of the previous encounters, but there's tell specific stories related to a theme. So anyway, yeah, tell that story. Write out 2 or 3 related to this. Orwell's Reign of Terror. This might be one of the other things. Might be beasts, or not beasts, but celestial are bleeding over into our world, and where bad ones. Where evil ones are basically gaining strength and good ones are dying. Are gaining strength and good ones are dying. So I started to tell with that. There's this, I love these little Chwinga, I think they're pronounced. So these little sort of puppet, sort of phase spirits, Chwinga dying or sick. Let's say they ran across these nature spirits that are dying or sick, that their home is infested with Chartolin crystals, which is an element that you find that can be infused with fiendish energies. And the player's task is to go clear out this little area, their village of the Chartolin crystals, and maybe they run into quicklings or some other sort of evil fae in that process. And maybe even the quicklings were Chingawa that turned into this later. I mean, I think that's interesting, and it tells the story of the sort of corruption of this region by Orwell's Sick and Dying. Dying or sick, clean crystals. I'm capturing this. Crystals out and face quicklings. All right, so that's another encounter. And you could just go you can list these out. I'm not going to do it for everyone here. Usually what I do is I do this to get my thoughts out. And then I actually watch this right afterward and I type out the things I was thinking more fully. And that's what I do. This live stream is really useful for me because it helps me think through the elements of my own design techniques. Because often game masters know this stuff. Right? A lot of you, if you're watching this at all, a lot of you might not find this particularly new or insightful. It's just good to remind yourself of this. And one, it's really good. What we often lack as DMs is the discipline to set aside some time to actually do it. We know these things. It's getting to do it that's a challenge, which is a big giant metaphor for life, right? So that's what I'm doing here. I'm getting these ideas out, and immediately after I actually write and do that. And if you look at it, 2 hours to prepare for a game, really not that much. I actually, as a game master, think that that's reasonable. The less time, the better, I'll say. I think we get into this weird contest as DMs of, I spend 4 hours preparing my campaign every week. I spend 6 hours. I win. You know, that's actually, you win if you run a great game by spending the least amount of time preparing for it. That's my win condition. And I hope you realize that that's probably yours too. It's not a competition. All you want to do is have fun. Fun is the only benchmark which we measure our time in tabletop role-playing games on. So anyway, I use this as that technique. All right, so foreshadowing encounters, that's what I sort of do. That it always ties back to some plot element. Now, themed encounters are a little different. I look at the core themes of the module itself, and I always write those out. And then I create some things that are maybe not related to a grand plot element, because I don't want to set the tone that everything that happens is related to a central plot thing. Not everything that has to, but I do want it to relate back to a central theme. And here the themes of it are, I said desperate survival, and then the developers of the module say fantasy, horror, paranoia, isolation, and secrets. I think that's true, but an important thing to think about as a DM is pacing and the types of encounters that you go through. One of the huge weaknesses of any module, but particularly of Rime of the Frostmaiden, is it can be monotonous. You're always in the dark. You're always at night. It's always nighttime. It's always cold. It's always hard to get around. And it's just terror encounter after terror encounter after terror encounter. It could just get it can lose its effectiveness. It can lose its bite. And worst of all, it can become uninteresting over the time if it's just, oh, monster of the week comes forward and it's another vampire and it's killing people. So you want themed encounters that provide different types of choices. Some of them might be have the theme of sort of being that horror theme or being dark, whereas you might need moments of levity, and you might need to laugh a little bit more. So having a good set of themed encounters to do that is a way to mix up pacing a little bit, which will bring me to the last item, which is sort of pacing of encounters and frequency. And I'll get to that in a second, but let me talk to you about what themed encounters might be. Now, these actually typically bleed into the types of encounters you've previously been using, but they have a specific narrative focus. So like one that's been in my mind is I would love this idea of survival. Everyone loves the idea of a snowy owl bear and everyone looking to face off against one. But I think subverting expectations just to subvert them isn't always good. I want to subvert expectations in this way, in that a snowy owl bear is pregnant, looking to roost, and being harassed by a pack of wolves, or some other monster, a pack of wolves or crag cats. I don't know what's happening there. So that, I mean, I love that type of encounter in games because it lets the players take a pause. It's not, you see this hooting, growling, and it's obviously pregnant and it's swatting at these creatures who are just circling around her, and, it's circle of life kind of stuff. But what do the players want to do in the midst of this? Do they chase the wolves off? Do they move on and just say, not my problem, and move away? Do they decide they want the snowy owl's pelt itself? Or, and then they have to negotiate the snowy owl isn't necessarily intelligent. It's not going to make friends with it just because it killed the wolves. It might attack them too. So you set the pace. You tell the story of what does the wilderness do? Is it a cartoony kind of wilderness? Is it anime where every creature is actually just kind of a friend in waiting for you to do something positive? Is it transactional? If you do something good for it, it does something good for you. Is it the harsh indifference of nature where it's afraid? There's all kinds of points of view that can come from a simple encounter like that you can build towards and do something interesting. Although I will say encounters like this are fraught with dangers for DM. It's something you have to think about. Anytime you throw a baby animal in, I don't want to kill a baby owl. I'm not going to do that. So I'm not going to actually have them see anything. I want to give the illusion of a threat of it. And I tweeted this earlier in the week that game mastering and tabletop role-playing games are like one shared lie, right? You're in collusion to tell this lie that as a DM, you're going to do awful things and let awful things happen. And as a player, you're in danger of these awful things happening. When the truth is, the DM wants the player to defeat these awful things. That the DM wants the player to sort of be successful. I'm not trying to kill you, but we'll agree to this illusion that I'm trying to beat you for a little while. So again, we get back to this. So the danger with the player and baby animals is that the player wants to adopt one. Like, I know a player, the first thing they'll think is, I will get a snowy owl egg and I will raise my own personal snowy owl. There's nothing wrong with that if you want that in your campaign, but you should be pretty sure that you want that in your campaign before throwing it out there. So this encounter, they would have to kill this mother to take the egg, which is a whole weird thing. I don't see this party doing it. I feel comfortable in the midst of this campaign making this a random encounter. But I would caution you to really think about that, to know your group before you put something like that in. The other is I want to create a few things with levity. That's so I want there's from the old Star Trek, the original old school Star Trek. There's a Harry Mudd character who's kind of a con man merchant. Harry Mudd, con man merchant, trapped in we'll say he's like trapped in a river, like ice in a river, and needs help getting out. And he's just kind of going to con the players into getting as much as he can out of them. And it's a role-playing encounter. He's kind of funny. The players can sort of convince him. He's self-interested. The players, what's at stake is RP. Players convince him to sell wares to town cheaply. That's really the opportunity there. They'll run across him. He's just run across some big. He bought a bunch of supplies off of some some put upon caravan, and now he's like overflowing with supplies. The player he thinks he's going to go make a killing in the 10 counts by charging an arm or leg for it. The players can offer to help him. Maybe he even says to the players, you can get in on this. I'm going to be rich. I'll give you some gold too. We can be rich together. But you're just going to have to wait a little while because I don't have it on me. I mean, I wouldn't walk around with that kind of treasure. He says something like that, and so it gives them a tip of to what's going on, that he's looking to sort of fleece these towns, and the players can decide, hey, I want that money, I'm going to go along with it, or they decide, I'm going to go ahead and actually tell this guy, no, I won't help you unless you offer these cheaply, or just make it a lighthearted encounter, and put that in your notes, lighthearted. He'll pout if he doesn't get his way, but ultimately he's sort of a scoundrel, but he's that lovable scoundrel type where he'll do it begrudgingly, and he'll have to be made to do the right thing in most cases, but he will do the right thing if he's made to. So, write, and I would say write a good 5 encounters in this theme encountered, all with different pacing, because again, the utility of a random encounter is to really break up the pacing of a game. If you found that you're going from encounter to encounter in your survival, it's a survival theme every time, and they're just holding on by the sort of their nails, and they're barely getting by. Well, this is a great way to break up that pacing and give them a lighthearted encounter or a moment of rest, or something that they feel like they can move on and not have to feel constantly under the gun and constantly anxious. Just a nice moment to breathe. Or conversely, if they've had a lot of luxury, if they've been sitting around, they're doing a lot of role playing, throw an encounter in that's heavy combat, and really just excites things. An owlbear crashes through the building. It's just had it. It smells the honey in this building, and it's going after it, or something like that. I don't know, but just use it as a way to break up the pacing and the monotony of a game, and throw in something different and good that's tied back to the overall theme of the game. And that gets to my sort of last point I wanted to make about pacing of these adventures and how to do it. Now, all modules, because they have to include this sort of number of wilderness encounters, and one, from dawn to noon, you might do one, or it just like, is it one a day? Is it one every watch, which is every 4 hours or so? Is it only at night? Is it more likely at night? I think that's a bad way to think about it. You should have random encounters when you need them. Games and running games you're not victim to dice rolls. Dice should help. I love to see where the dice take us, but I don't like to be a slave to the dice. So I hit moments where I think, oh, this is a great time to insert in a random encounter. Or you got nothing, you need to pad some time, pull out a random encounter. Or you just think, you want to give the players more time to think. Go ahead and throw a random encounter, give them a pause, take up some time in game, and give the players some time to think. You should, as a game master, this is a crafted experience. Now, the world should be reacting to the players, and you shouldn't they should let things unfold in the world based on the player's choices and actions, but you can insert these at moments of uncertainty, at moments where things seem dull, at moments where you think you need a change of pace, where there's been too tense for a while, and you need to ratchet down this sense of tension, in a moment where you want to introduce a new plot line that's coming 3 levels later. But do random encounters that tease at it right now. I'm going to stay away from that term. I think you could decide as a game master, this is a great moment for a random encounter. Let me throw something in here. Other than that, just use montages. If you're traveling from location to location, this is usually the big culprit for random encounters, is travel. People don't know what to do with travel. You can run it several different ways. You can do the montage. Days have gone by, day after day passes. You've been trolling through the tundra. Your eyes have a hard time focusing on anything because of the brightness of the snow. And 3 days later, you're exhausted and you show up at your location. That's a totally fine way to handle it. Game masters sometimes feel compelled to roll every day and make this travel tedious, and random encounters stretch things out by 2 sessions. And now they've gotten to that location they've been traveling to. Half of them have forgotten why they were even going there. That's not a good feel for a game. So put them in where you think it's useful to tell a story, and have a good 10 random encounters ready to go, and pick the one. Pick it. Don't roll randomly. Pick the one that you think best breaks up the monotony of the game, adds an interesting piece of lore or interesting piece of new information, foreshadows or teases something new, or just provides some excitement or some challenging encounter. And the last bit is never make it something in a field, not orcs in a field. Give them a point of view. If you look back at this encounter, when I went up to the encounters I cut it down to, there's an encounter with orcs of the many arrow tribes. They're really not featured anywhere in the module. So instead, I changed that to, they're willing to trade. They feed info about the Duragar because they live up in the Sword Mountains. And their point of view is they don't want to fight. They actually think, they'll say, I wrote some dialogue. I love to do this. I wrote the one thing that sort of sums up the attitude of this encounter. So the orc would lean in and say, this fight is not ours. By all means, fight if you think this is a test of might. But our wise speakers know this is a test of endurance, and we mean to stand when it's over. So that gives a heavy point of view of the orcs, that they're here. They're going to endure this winter by Orwell, and they think all the people of the 10 towns are foolish to be fighting one another. And that gives more depth and complexity to orcs, which I love. I love breaking down that trope. It tells you a moral point of view about the 10 towns, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the game master's point of view. One of the tensions of a situation like this, I think, is that always the tension between self-interest overriding group interest, and how much is the group going to pull together versus how are they going to act in self-interest, and what damage that might do in either case. You don't have to pick one, but you can say an imbalance of the two is a problem, and that's what I'm trying to say here. So that's why I craft that encounter this way. Excuse my little thing here. Charlin Berserkers might be another one. Tie it to the Tiger Tribe and foreshadowing of their growing army. That they are using these Charlin crystals to get Berserkers filled with fiendish energy to give them extra power to take down other tribe members. All of that is relevant, and I thought these were good encounters. So give yourself a little bullet point of what you might want to do. Like, for instance, the encounter with Frost Giant riding a mammoth. I want to tease this Jarlmoot scenario that might be happening later, and he prefers not to fight. Even if you're evil, it'd be exhausting to fight everything you see. That doesn't mean you're a psychopath. But he's just riding a mammoth, and he says, "Move! If I have to scrape one of you off of my mount's toes by Talus, I will kill the lot of you." He's just disdainful. It's up to the players. Do they get offended by that? Are they going to challenge him and cause a fight? He doesn't mind it. He just prefers not to. Do they want to make friends with him? Do they want to get information? Do they ignore him and just get out of the way? This is a test. It should be a role-playing test during the encounter itself. All right. Well, I've really gone through the things that I think are important here. I hope you've gotten something out of this. I hope you will think about how you're designing random encounters in the cases of your own adventure. So to crystallize down what I think they should not be random. These should be slices, small little vignettes that tell additional stories about the world. They can tell a side plot. They can relate to a coming plot. They can relate to the current plot. They can relate to the theme, but they should always loop back to the core story you're trying to tell within your campaign. That's one. Two, you only need 10. You don't need that many, maybe 10, maybe even 5 at a time is all you need. But they should tell different stories about different parts of the world. Two is you do it on the fly. Let the players, especially in urban environments, let the players be the random encounter generators as much as humanly possible, because it keeps them holding their sense of agency. It lets you know any player action is a de facto statement of interest. So it lets you know what they're interested in and what they find interesting. And anytime they call out an action, a role-playing action of theirs, that's something they want to have more out of. And if you can find a way to do that, you're doing a good job as a game master. And then the last bit is just don't feel tied to a certain pacing for them. Use them to break up elements of your campaign and decide to insert them when you think is useful. And do them around the areas of canned adventures, tied back foreshadowing stuff, or themed encounters. So I think that is what is most useful for a game master to do when it comes to random encounters. I'm going to go ahead and after this session, I'm going to write up a few more bullets that I think are useful. At the end of the day, I'm probably going to end up with 20 or so loose bullets that I'll sort of flourish as I get into the game itself. And that's another advantage of choosing when to put it in a random encounter. You can kind of do it when you're inspired. You're not stuck doing it just because you have to. But when you have a list like this, it's pretty easy to get inspired or just do that last tweak to make it useful for your adventure here. All right, so that's really what I had today to talk about. I hope you've enjoyed this stream. If you would like to ask me any questions, make a comment about the quality of the stream, things you would like to see happen, please go ahead and leave them down in the comments on YouTube or send them over to me on Twitter. I am Optional Rule over on Twitter. I'm happy to engage people really anywhere that I run across them. So I would love to hear from you. Please leave a thumbs up, a like. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitter, on Twitch. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter, of course. Go ahead and give me a subscription on YouTube. I would really appreciate it. It would help this channel out a lot. And please, if you think this is useful, go ahead and share this media on your media. Go ahead and retweet it. Go ahead and link it on your social media accounts. If you follow me on Twitter, go ahead and retweet or reply to any of those information I'm sharing. This is November, so this is Naga Demon, I think is the name of the Nagadamon. So it's a play on Rime or whatever the national month of novel writing that happens in November. This is the national month of game design creation. So every day I'm posting to Twitter some piece of game creation, whether that be a new spell, a new magic item, a new monster stat block, I posted a map of Tressendar Manor, which was very well received earlier in the week. And I'll be doing that throughout the entire month of November. I would love to see your creations too. So if you're doing it, please go ahead and post and tag me. I would love to see what you're doing. I'd love for you to see what I'm doing. And if you think they're useful, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share to those as well. All right, well, that's it for today. I really appreciate you joining me. It's great to talk to you, my audience, as always. Again, if you have a question, go ahead and leave a comment or ask me on Twitter. I'm happy to answer that. Until next week, I'll be back at noon next week with session prep, I hope. So it's been great having you here. I hope you've enjoyed the stream. And until next week, remember, fun is not optional. Thank you very much, everybody, and I'll talk to you next week.